Hey everyone, welcome to the Questioning Behavior podcast, where we question all things behavioral science, because that's literally all we talk about, and I'm not even kidding.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy that don't believe
So
in
today we're actually questioning the behavior, or actually more likely we're questioning how easy or how difficult it is to transition from industry back into academia, or maybe even the other way around. So today we're actually going to be talking to a hybrid.
Yes, more hybrids. I love hybrids. They're my favorite type of bread.
I don't know how many other Brits there are, to be quite honest with you. But no, the hybrid, or what, at least what it means to us here on this podcast, is a topic Sarah and I both find fascinating. To very quickly recap, a hybrid, at least in the way we talk about it, is someone who has successfully merged a career in industry with a career in academia. Doesn't matter which one is more dominant, at least it is a merger of the two, and they've done so successfully, and they are known or renowned in both sectors.
Yes. Yeah. I've always been told subliminally that actually, if you get your PhD and you leave academia for industry, you are not a good academic. Like, that is the...
What part of that was told to you subliminally? I've had that told to me literally.
Yeah. I mean, no one's really being shy about it. I mean, some...
No, this is hella known.
Yeah, but it's really weird because at the same time as you're getting this message, you also have the rise of the impact agenda. So you also have people trying to contextualize research and work with industry partners, and that's becoming like really key to being a successful researcher. Obviously, it's going to differ over disciplines, but I mean, even in behavioral science lends itself quite well to industry applications. So you have these two things going on, which is sort of quite dissonant and kind of just really snobbish.
Oh yeah,
snobbish. Is that a word? Yes, that's what I mean.
Ask the non-English person to tell you if the English language works for you, yes or no. Snobbish. I think it's a great word.
Yeah. And this isn't the first time, we've talked about academia being full of
a bunch of snobs.
Yeah, it is what it is. I don't think it's an excuse for people to be snobbish and arseholes to each other, but actually going into industry can be as valuable and as interesting and as academically rewarding as staying in academia.
Yeah, it's a good point. The thing is, if within behavioral science, like you think of the titans, so I mean the first people that come to mind are obviously the Nobel Prize winners who
Sure.
who are, I mean, they're academics. I mean, they're Nobel Prize winners, so obviously they're academics. But then there is massive titans in industry as well who are known for doing really, really great work. So, for example, think of Rory Sutherland, who moved from marketing into behavioral science, but has always been an industry titan. I think of a lot of people in Ogilvy, and you'll find a lot of titans to begin with. Or think of people that are currently in the BITs all over the world. They're titans as well. So if you look at that, I mean, it's not like academia simply has better or more people that are of status. That's just no longer true. So I think maybe it's time academia gets off its high horse. Because I'm getting quite tired. I don't want to be typecast as a snob because I'm an academic. I'm actually really, really keen on working with industry and just, trying to very desperately avoid or find a way around the endless trajectory that is the publication process, which will take me into infinity and fucking beyond, because it is that slow. And if there's a way to avoid that and actually get useful information out, which is relevant, because I suppose I'm in the consumer behavior sector, so which is relevant for consumers, which is relevant for individuals. I just want to get it out. I just want people to know how to manage their money and what pitfalls to look out for, because that's just what I study. I don't, I'm getting a bit annoyed about putting stuff or having stuff exclusively in academic circles
Yeah.
And having other academics read it and having published it, in hopefully eventually in academic journals, which are very inaccessible to the wider public, and this just propagates itself. Like this is not really what I'm signing up for. So my dream, my goal in life is to be a hybrid, is to have
Yeah.
my stuff outside of academia, because otherwise I'm not entirely sure what the value of it is.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm getting heated on this. Like I feel like a rant is coming up, so I think we maybe should just introduce our guest.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, what I want to say is, at the moment, I think it's a preconception that it's a binary, that you either are in industry or academia, where it should be a spectrum, where everyone is a hybrid to a certain degree.
Fluidity.
But yes, I think we should stop us prattling on about it and moaning about it, and let's talk to someone who's got a little bit more experience and actually a very different perspective and experience of academia than we do.
Yes, because she actually had a very successful career in industry and still has a successful career with her own behavioral science consultancy. But she actually decided that even though she was very happy in industry and very successful, that she would do a PhD, so back into academia, to talk about that experience and to talk about her perceptions of both academia and industry. We are going to talk to Nurit Nobel today, which I'm really excited for. So take it away, Nurit. Hey everyone! Today we're actually talking to Nurit, who, as you all know, is going to have to introduce herself to you. So Nurit, please do introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? Where do you live? All that good stuff.
Sure. So my name is Nurit Nobel. I have two main things that I do, I guess. First of all, I have a consultancy that I co-founded, a behavioral science consultancy that I co-founded with another friend and colleague who is a behavioral economist. And together we work with companies, with organizations on implementing principles from behavioral science in whatever strategic challenge they have. So I have that hat, and then also I'm doing a PhD at the Stockholm School of Economics in the Center of Economic Psychology, which sits in the Department of Business Administration. So I'm doing that as well, and I live in Stockholm, Sweden.
Fantastic. So you say you run your own behavioral science consultancy business, but how did you actually get into behavioral science? How did you enter the field initially?
Yeah, it was a long and convoluted journey. But I guess, it started like it did for many people with my undergraduate degree. I had a general inclination and interest in human psychology and human behavior. But I was also really fascinated, I guess, by organization and by the business environment, business dynamics. So I actually did my undergraduate degree in psychology and management. It was a double major. I didn't think that I wanted to go into behavioral science, and I definitely didn't think that I wanted to get into research. So actually the most natural thing for me to do after my undergraduate degree was go into business. And the end of the story is sort of that I ended up spending quite a few years in business, actually close to 10 years. Often it sounds like people kind of know in the beginning what they want to do and go for it. And actually maybe a lot of people are like that, but it wasn't like that for me. So for me, I really was convinced that I wanted to be in business. And I don't think at 20 you really know what that means, but I sort of saw in my head like a very well-dressed businesswoman, and that was what I wanted to be. It wasn't really about the money, but it was really about being in a fast-paced, dynamic environment of excellence and so on. And that's why I wanted to go that direction. And for a long time when I was there, that fitted me fine. But I think it took me then some time to understand that it actually maybe wasn't fulfilling all of my needs, and it wasn't maybe a 100% great fit. So actually during my time at P&G, I took a leave of absence and did a master's actually in the UK at London School of Economics in organizational psychology. but that wasn't really like, afterwards I just got back to P&G and continued working. So that wasn't either like kind of like getting me off that track. So a lot of time needed to pass and a lot of things needed to happen in my life for me to really like, okay, what do I really want? Because for a long time, all of this was actually fine. It wasn't one of these cases that I had started there and then after a few years I was like, this isn't working, and like left. I was actually having a great time, and all of these things that I had wanted from that job really were there. But then at some point it wasn't, and then I left my other job, so the one that I had after Procter and Gamble, and then I decided to start my own behavioral science consultancy. And that was following just like, I would say, a moment of clarity that came following an experience of being in a conference and just kind of things coming together, and from all of my previous knowledge in psychology, and I had read all not only the books, but the academic articles that they were based on. And when I was studying in my bachelor, I actually had the privilege to study with the people. I mean, my professors were people who were students of Kahneman and Tversky, who are Israeli. And so that was very much embedded in me already, but I sort of neglected all of that in the business world. But suddenly I went to a conference, and like a lot of talks about kind of behavioral science, and the whole like nudging idea started to gain popularity. And I was like, what am I doing, like applying these concepts to, just drive more people to buy a certain brand or product? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like I could be doing so much more. It was more about like, wow, I have these tools that, I did the bachelor's, I did the master's, but I just kind of like wasn't really using it for that. And suddenly like hearing that other people are using it to get people to like stop smoking or save more money or do all these things, I was like, wow, that's really noble. I want to work with that. So after following this moment of clarity and a few iterations also, and meeting the right people, including Christina Gravert, my co-founder, who is, as I mentioned, a behavioral economist or a professor in behavioral economics, then we decided to form this thing together. Me coming from psychology, her coming from economics, and working like consulting companies and organizations on behavioral science.
Oh, that's great. So you're an economist and a psychologist together. That's a really good combination.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and we think so. I think it's the two disciplines really both have something to contribute here, especially when your goal is to implement behavioral science and behavioral interventions in organizations. A lot of them are based on actually knowledge from psychology. And that's something that's embedded in our discipline. And I think that is something that I have more tools in. But a lot of the methods come from economics, a lot of the impact comes from economics, and just in general, I think the combination of the two can be really strong. But it's also just in the level of like how we work together. I think the more diverse the set of skills and backgrounds that people come with, the more creative the process, and we learn a lot from each other. And it's just better for our clients. And then it's also, we also have different backgrounds in the sense that I come actually from a background as a practitioner, not a behavioral science practitioner, but an actual practitioner, a manager in these kind of organizations that we today work with, whereas Christina is a pure academic and much more informed than me in the tools of science and conducting RCTs and conducting these interventions and everything. But me coming from organizations, I know a lot better how to talk to the stakeholders and how to manage the stakeholders and all of that. So it is a really successful combination in that sense. And I think we also get inspired from each other. So now if we go back to like how I also came to do the PhD, so I was really inspired by Christina, and even though I do enjoy our work in implementing behavioral science and I want to keep doing that, something in me wanted to like go back one step and actually go deeper. I know that there's a lot of discussion on whether or not you need a PhD to do what we do.
Yeah.
You took the question out of my mouth. That's right.
Exactly. And I think that I definitely subscribe to the camp that you don't. And, I was doing this without it. But there are other reasons why you might want to have it still. And then, everyone should do their own, cost benefit analysis because the cost of a PhD, I think, are large. And they are especially large if you do them the way that I did them coming from industry. Because it's one thing to do it as a young person who's just finished being a student, not really not really having adjusted to any kind of large income, but it's another thing to do it after, like when your salary drops from like quite high to like not at all. That's something you need to be ready for. So there is a price to the PhD. So I definitely wouldn't say that like everyone should just like a blanket statement that everyone should have one if they wanna do this. But I chose it because of my own reasons.
Sure.
I don't know whether this is a personal question, but for you, what did that cost benefit analysis look like? And what were the benefits that sort of outweighed the costs of doing the PhD for you personally?
Yeah. The big benefit and what really drew me the most to it was the chance to go deep into what I was doing as a consultant, but like really doing it just for the sake of like learning the methods, learning the tools, learning the science behind it in a way that I think a PhD allows you that just reading a bunch of books don't allow you, or even just taking a few courses, because I had taken plenty of courses. I had a master's. And of course, I read all the books in my private time, but to actually go through a research project, to lead it, to do it, to think about it, to try to publish it, to try to sell it to other academics, to raise interest in your work, is just something else. And I think a part of me wanted to experience that, and a part of me like saw the benefit of that for being a true expert.
Okay.
So that was the main thing. And I think that I chose. I mean, the reasons why I started to do the PhD are also a bit different from I think what I feel now. I mean, at first it was really to kind of build myself as a consultant. Like I was still seeing the consultancy as the main thing that I do, and the PhD sort of being one more way to become an expert so that I can consult better.
Right.
Whereas now I'm kind of like digging like what I do here, and maybe I will end up actually like more doing that. I still hope that I will forever be able to combine the two, because I do think that it's a great combination to be able to both do research and actually implement it in practice. But now I sort of see the value of it also outside of just consultancy, but in and of itself.
All right. So those were the reasons for you personally, which I think are great reasons to start a PhD, and I'm pretty sure you never got discouraged given that motivation. But in general, what would you argue are really important reasons to keep in mind for either doing or not doing a PhD? Because like you said, it also depends on your starting point.
Yeah, the benefits of academia that I see versus industry, so to do a PhD in kind of as a gateway to an academic career, is really the freedom that you have. And actually, I think that like if this wasn't kind of unpaid, this would be the best job in the world. Like I'm having a really good time as a PhD student, but I think maybe also I can appreciate a lot of things because I come from a very different world. So for example, I know a lot of things we talk about. A lot of times we talk about the freedom in the PhD as kind of maybe like the bad consequences of that you kind of feel alone, that you maybe don't have a lot of guidance. And I know a lot of people suffer from that for real. But for me, coming from industry, it's like finally, like, they leave me alone. Like in industry, you have the opposite problem, where you have sometimes maybe a boss that micromanages you, or where you're in a really large organization, such as the company I started my career in, and it's just very, very hard to drive things forward because they need to be approved by a lot of levels in a lot of places. You need to write a record just to like implement the smallest thing. Whereas now, if I want to change my design, I do it. And even if I come to my supervisor and ask them what they think, they always finish with, at the end, it's your experiment, or it's your study, or it's your research. Like we can tell you what we think, but the decision is yours, which I think is like so much fun. But I understand that maybe if you're like young and inexperienced, that can also be a pitfall. Like that can be a bit confusing and a bit. But for someone coming with a bit more experience, that's like a huge benefit. So I think that like we talk about lack of structure, but in industry sometimes you have like an over structure, and like you just get like bogged down in bureaucracy, or just like in general, here maybe nobody tells you what to do, but there like you have instances where like it's 6 in the evening, then you're about to leave the office, and like your boss drops like a load of paper on your desk, and like make a presentation out of all of this by tomorrow morning. That's just something that doesn't happen in a PhD, not in my experience anyway. So I think the two have maybe different challenges, but I'm kind of like really enjoying this right now. The fact that I don't have all of these annoying things that I had before.
It's really interesting to hear your perspective, because at least from Mela and I, we don't have that experience in industry. So we came into academia from a very different starting point. So I am interested if you had, or if you've noticed, are there any misconceptions about academia within industry? And on the other side, what have you noticed within academia? Are there any sort of misconceptions about how things are done in industry and practitioners that are false or interesting from your perspective?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Misconceptions. I think, how academics view industry is sort of like it's inferior. Maybe that also has to do with the fact that, again, I get most of my academic input from my partner in crime, Christina, who is an economist, and I feel like you guys just have a general tendency towards how shall we call it?
Superiority complex.
Exactly, you said it. Your words, not mine.
Also, you guys, I'm not an economist. I don't identify with this. Leave me out of this.
Yeah, no, I was talking specifically to Sarah.
Okay.
But I think there is maybe a general tendency in academia to kind of think that everything else is just not really worth the time of day to even discuss. So I think that that's very interesting, and someone should do a research about that. But because there are really smart people in industry, and of course, like they sort of think the same about academia. Not that everyone, of course, is sure that a lot of smart people are in academia, but sort of like, why are you doing that? Like you're just sitting in your labs all day. It has like zero relevance to the real world. Like that's maybe sort of the misconception that they have over there, which I also find, totally not true. But yeah, so I think that as always, like stereotypes, the world starts to be a more interesting place when you get to jump around from group to group and see how they are really superficial and how there's so much more inside. And that's how I feel now, like that I sort of have a leg in each. And especially because I think a lot of maybe academics, like most of their friends are academics because you meet each other in the graduate school or whatever. But most of my friends are from industry, so they are now like, what are you doing? Like why is this I find myself like also being that bridge, to them. So yeah.
So you've been in academia, or you are in academia. You have been and are still in industry. Like you've already mentioned the freedom that comes with being in one and not so much in the other. Are there any other differences, like very notable differences that people might not be as aware of between academia and industry?
Well, I mean, the differences, I think, are, the things that I mentioned about like freedom, I think is a major thing, like how much things are a lot more structured. And by that, I mean, especially for junior people, like junior people starting in the workforce in industry will typically have a very structured, like, this is your project, these are your deadlines, this is what you need to do. Whereas the same is, I think, true to a lesser extent in academia. I think in general, like deadlines, maybe time pressure, I think is less of an issue in academia, whereas it can be really like in high pace places in industry, it's really a stressor. It's like it's a big thing. I think it's less like that here. But other than that, I do think that there's a lot of things that are also similar that maybe people don't realize. I think like the maybe like in terms of to do a good job, like you still need to like manage projects and manage your time and manage yourself, and sometimes even like manage collaborations with other people. That is, I think, more crucial in industry than in so that's maybe another difference. Like in industry, you really, I think, cannot achieve anything alone ever. Like it's always a team, and it's always other people, and there are going to be people that are comfortable to work with, and you gel with really well, and there are going to be people that are less, and that's always like a point of friction. And whereas in academia, I think you can do pretty well by like only working with yourself. But again, like I think really great stuff. No,
Well, it depends. You have to be like an ultra genius, potentially, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but I haven't seen a published paper by a single author in a long time. I haven't seen it in a while.
Really?
No, I haven't. I think collaborations are actually getting bigger and bigger, but that might just be the field that I'm in or the stuff that I'm looking at. Like most papers that I read are like 3 authors or more.
No, I definitely think there's been a push in the recent years for more interdisciplinarity, and that's sort of alongside the impact agenda. So now it's become potentially a good signal if you can show that the paper has been published by a group.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, Nurit, that there are people who can work in isolation and still have a very good career in academia. Like if you don't have good social skills, and you don't actually need to rely on other people. But I think that's potentially more of a smaller subset of academics than we think.
Yeah. But it's an interesting point, Merle, that you make. Like maybe it is becoming like less and less true, and I think that is a good thing, because collaboration, as I mentioned before, like it just brings more creativity and like great stuff. So I do really like that. But yeah, so I think. But anyway, so I was saying that like I think to succeed in both, you kind of really need to be like, I mean, there are certain things that are going to help you, like to be able to lead a project from start to finish, even if you're only leading yourself, is something that you need to do both in industry and as a PhD student or in academia. Like it is still a project with like with milestones and with things, and like now now it's the ethical application, and now it's the this, and now it's designing the study, and now it's it's like a multi-step process that you need to manage, and so you need to be structured. I think it helps, and maybe that's where a lot of people, I think, kind of lose themselves without the guidance of like how to do these things. And that's the kind of things I feel like, me coming from industry, like it's pretty fine-tuned, my ability to like lead these kind of like multi-step projects, and that's helping a lot. But I do think that it's a really good skill to have also as a PhD student. So maybe people think less about these things, think more about like, I need this statistical tool, or I need to learn to code in this language, I need to learn Qualtrics, I need to learn that. And I think all these things are important, but people think less about I need to learn time management and to lead projects and these kind of things.
No, that's a really fair point.
As a hybrid yourself, I'm a little bit interested. Do you think it's possible to have a career that is sort of 50% academic and 50% in industry? Or do you think that at the end you have to sort of pick a side and have sort of a primary career in industry with sort of a secondary career in academia? What do you think that looks like? Do you think it's possible to toe that line, or do you have to make a choice?
I think that's such a good question that I think is on my mind and on a lot of people's minds. So I cannot say that I have cracked it. I can say that I have tried to outsource to crowdsource many answers when I was wondering about the same things and going to do a PhD and so on. And I mean, there are certainly examples, I think, of eminent researchers who are as eminent in their like non-research activities, like, for example, Dan Ariely, who really seems to have like a hand in everything and is doing a lot of things now also on like, he basically started like a behavioral insights team in Israel, and they're helping the government a lot with like anything from, solving gridlock issues, so like traffic, to now like coronavirus. They're doing so many cool things. It's very inspiring. But he's also a tenured professor at Duke, and but I don't know. So like on the one hand, these kind of cases show that maybe it can be done, but on the other hand, how many Dan Ariely's are there? Like, he's clearly an outlier in more than one way. He's truly an outlier. So I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. I mean, I want to say that that maybe if you try to do everything, you end up kind of not doing anything well. But I don't know. Like, I wish that it wasn't like this, but I do notice that, if there are weeks or months that I have like big consulting projects and like the PhD is more on hold, I get less done. Like, I could have done more had I been doing the PhD like 100%. So, there is a trade-off to everything. And I think you need to think about like where your heart is, how much do you see yourself in either.
No, you could definitely think of it as a scarcity problem, and almost that you need to have, I don't know whether you think this is true, or sort of you need to switch on different hats or different sides of your brain when you're thinking about industry versus thinking about how you would think about things in academia, which seems quite interesting. And in the case of Dan Ariely and other sort of outliers like him, it seems that these people start in academia and transfer into industry. I mean, are there any examples?
And after they are already tenured.
Right.
Also.
Because this tenure system in academia, it takes so long to transition from being a student to a professor to a tenured professor. Do you think that, I don't know, are there any examples of people who've managed to do it the other way around? I can't think of any. I'm sure Google search would probably help me, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that we are all learning like how more models, how this could look. So it remains to be seen if one can combine the two. I definitely hope so.
Yeah, maybe it could be you. You are the model.
Exactly. Let's hold our horses with
let's
that.
be inspiring. Let's trailblaze. Come on.
Yes.
I would be happy to trailblaze.
There we go. Promise made. There's your commitment device.
Yeah. So, I mean, what advice would you give people? You've had lots of experience in industry and have made the jump to academia, at least to doing a PhD. What advice would you give to someone, who is interested in doing a PhD, but it feels as though they've been out of the game too long?
Yeah. Well, it really is never too late. I mean, that's the first thing. I mean, if you really want to go for something, I think you should just go for it with like, I mean, maybe it's too late when you're, I don't know, 50. But I do have some colleagues in my PhD program who are, I think, maybe nearing that number, and are doing that and pursuing that. So I think that if you want to go for something, you should. And then, but then I think that you should really maybe find like the right program is maybe the first challenge of both finding like the program that will accept you, but also the program that you will thrive in. I think that the program that I'm in now at Stockholm School of Economics, I really feel like I have a lot of freedom. I'm not even really part of any research project, which on the one hand, it means that I need to go out there and get my own data and have my own ideas about projects. And like no one is really telling me, guiding me in any direction. But that kind of works for me. I think that unless I would have found exactly, the perfect project that aligns with my interest, I would have probably been put in like a project that I'm like, it's sort of okay, but not great. And that would not have made me happy. So for me, it works better to be kind of on my own and whatever. But if you are not a person that thrives on that, then you should look for the right project with the right supervisor to join, that you can just like carry their research and learn, and then, do other things on your own at a later stage. So yeah, looking for the right program maybe I think is maybe more important if you are experienced, if you've done a few things.
Then I'm also going to ask you the opposite question, because once you're in a PhD program, especially if you don't have any work experience, so this might not be something you can identify with very well, but hear me out and please help us out. We don't have we don't have any work experience. I mean, let's just put it as it is. We have always been academics. Now I'm leaning more towards academia. I'm not towing that line as much as Sarah is. Sarah has made it very clear she's aiming to be a hybrid, grounded in industry. That's her aim of the game, which is it is actually quite interesting. I don't think it really relates to the superiority complex, or at least I hope not. But PhD students are quite heavily discouraged from going into industry because it's argued that we're not trained for industry, which I mean to some extent is very, very true. Because it's all quite theoretical what we do, I would argue. But what advice would you give to someone who has been in academia for a long while, and now wants to move into industry? Like, what is something you really have to watch out for?
Yeah, I think this is a super important issue because, I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, the PhD is a long training program for jobs that are becoming more and more scarce. There aren't enough academic jobs out there for all the PhD students. So we do need to accept the fact that PhD students will go to industry and that is okay. I think that the reason why professors discourage it is because they don't know how to help. Like, how can I help you? All I know is how to send you to this kind of track. I don't know how to help you if you choose another kind of track. So it is unfortunately a bit up to the PhD student to find their own sources and their own, guidance on that, because the professors, justifiably, they cannot help because they've never been in industry themselves. And I think that there are many, I mean, it is not in 100% correct that you are coming with zero experience. It is correct to say that you don't really have a job to show for yourself on a CV, but again, a lot of the skills of leading projects, of leading other people or collaborating with other people, problem solving, for sure, data analysis, all of these things are things that are happening in industry and are appreciated by industry. So I think the challenge is how to package it in a CV in a way that will make sense to industry people, so that they don't just say, this is an overqualified person who has just read a lot about behavioral science and I cannot use that. How to show them that you've led projects, that you've led people, that you've problem solved, that you've done data analysis, all these things that they are looking for in different roles. And this, of course, depends also on what's your direction and what you are interviewing for or applying for. So, I would really not discourage people from going to that route, because that route is going to be more and more common, because that's just the way that it is. And that's why I would encourage PhD students who are thinking about that, both to like take up engagements that are outside academia, just like you're doing this podcast, you're blogging, like doing these kind of things, maybe taking some non-paid consultancy work just to show that you've done something. I mean, you have the skills, the behavioral science, you can help someone for free to like get it going, for example. and also like hone the skills that are more relevant in like the workforce, that are more transferable, like learn a coding language and, you know, work on your project management, work on your like collaboration, whatever it is. Like not only I would say that maybe the one thing that is like least relevant is like, I don't know, reading a lot and, you know, writing a report, like writing a literature review is just something that you don't see a lot in industry unless you go to a think tank. But again, that's like something different. So like that's, you know, less of a wanted skill. So I think you really need to think like, what are the skills that are needed in industry and how can I work on myself to fit that?
Yeah. And I think that there is a misconception, and I'm hoping that it's a misconception, that if you are a PhD student and you leave academia, you can never really go back. It's a sort of a one-way door where you leave, the door shuts behind you, and that's it. You've made your choice. Could you speak to that? I know that isn't your experience, but what do you make of that? You know, preconception.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, you know, we're always just kind of used to a one-track thing. Like it should be this and this and then that. Like it should be a PhD and then a postdoc and then a assistant professor and then, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a bit harder for us to like process that it can also be something else. Maybe also because we don't have like salient examples of people who
I'm
have done
gonna
it
be that
differently.
example, people. I'm going to do this.
There you go. There you go. So I think if we meet these examples, we should one, like seek their advice, like how did you do it, and like lift them up and you know, talk about them, because I'm sure that someone has done that.
Right.
I mean, I don't know personally, but I'm sure that someone has done that. So I think that anything is possible. It's just that we don't, like, you know, availability heuristic, right? Like we don't have the information in front of us, so it's hard for us to come up with examples. So we think that it doesn't exist.
If someone is listening to this podcast who feels like they identify as a trailblazer, who have become a hybrid before being a hybrid was a real thing, you know, let us know on the socials. We're keen to talk to you. Like we need help. We need examples.
Yes, please. More models
Yes.
of what's possible. I think that's the right way to go.
I'm quite curious as to, so you mentioned like you have your own behavioral consultancy, and you're now at the same time doing the PhD. But once the PhD is finished, because you'll have to finish it eventually, which is another contested point in academia, you do have to finish the PhD. Then what? What was your plan for doing after the PhD initially, and what is your plan for finishing it now that you might actually be done soon? Has that changed?
That's a great question, because it has changed.
Ooh.
And I think that it can change again. So, and you know, I'm all for that. So I'm very open to whatever comes next. But I mean, my initial intention was basically nothing, like do the PhD, to do the PhD, to get that experience, to go deep, to like, you know, go through that learning experience, and then like go on with my life, with my consultancy, which has been going great and is going great. Whereas now more like, this is kind of fun. And maybe I actually do want to continue with research. And again, hopefully I can do both. But the question is like, will I go on the job market or all these, you know, things,
Yeah.
the academic job market by that, I mean. And I don't have an answer to that. So right now I'm really open to both. But, you know, because I have my consultancy and I have my other stuff, I think I'm less like stressed about it, or I'm less like I need to make a decision. Like I don't have to make a decision. I can continue with just like enjoying this experience and learning and you know, and doing all the things I came here to do, which is really to learn skills that I don't already have. And afterward, and I guess like as I progress, like when I reach more, you know, the fourth year maybe, I'll start thinking about like what do I want next.
Cool.
Yeah.
From our discussion today, or from your experience, what would be your key take-home message?
Well, my take-home message, I guess, is that we really should see and like more collaborations and between industry and between practitioners and academics. And there is a place for academics, or like for PhDs to move into industry. There is a place for people from industry to move into academics. It's just making all of us better. And in our particular field of behavioral science, there is a true value in taking these insights from the lab or from research to practice. So we need people who can make a connection between these worlds. That was my intention when I started with the consulting, like taking these ideas from the research to practitioners, to organizations that are interested in this. And there is a place for this. We know that there's interest. We know that the organizations, they want this, they crave this, and they need people who can help them with it. So I guess I urge people to try to do that, to be that bridge between academia and practice.
Fantastic.
Be the
Be the
bridge.
bridge. I like it. We should get
Yeah, it's
t-shirts
time
made.
for merch.
If people like what they hear and they just want to keep up to date with, what's going on with you, where can the listener find you?
Yeah, I tweet a lot about behavioral science also, so that would be a good place. So at nurit.nobel, Nurit is Nurit, Nobel is Nobel. And then my company, together with Christina, is called Impactually. We have a Twitter as well. We also have a website, so check us out there. What we do is exactly this. We take insights from behavioral science and we help organizations apply them to, diversity, environment, health, whatever issue they have. So that's it. So if you're curious, and if you're more of a practitioner, then LinkedIn, I guess, would be platform. So Nurit Nobel on LinkedIn.
There you go.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nurit, for that insight into what it is like to be a hybrid, effectively. Well, I think we've learned a lot of stuff, both as a full blown academics still ourselves. Sarah, how has this made you feel about your choice to likely go into industry and then make your way back to being a hybrid?
Well, I mean, I just love this term hybrid. And I mean, I think we've almost got like a mini podcast sub-series going on where we just get to talk to some really cool hybrids. So,
Life of a hybrid.
yeah, I mean, if it's possible to become one, that's the sort of the dream. But it was interesting to talk to Nurit about sort of models of, what an academic career should look like. Because, as was pointed out in the podcast, when we think about hybrids that are sort of outliers, sort of like Dan Ariely, who've been able to have a very successful career in academia and then transition into industry, it always seems to be that way round, right? You don't necessarily seem to be able to pull to the forefront of your mind cases where it might be the opposite, where you've had a long successful career in industry and then you become a trailblazer in the academic world. So yeah, we need more trailblazers is what I learned. What about you?
Well, I mean, I learned a lot of things, but to actually get back to your point of that we only see this hybridity or this return to a different sector in like one way, I think that might be because I think industry is much more open, and I think there isn't that much of a one-way trajectory in industry, whereas within academia there's quite a rigid model for how you go through academia. So you get a PhD and then you do hopefully only one postdoc, might be multiple postdocs, then you become an assistant. Some people immediately go through being an associate professor, and then you have to be that for several years, until I don't know, until you reach a certain experience level, until you've reached a certain level of publications. I think once you've published in Science or Nature, you should be good, and then you become a tenured professor. At least that's what that track has always looked like to me. And with such a rigid mold, which, I mean, you can argue whether this is a route which is sustainable or maintainable, as more people do PhDs and the academic job market in itself isn't really growing, at least not at the top layers. So yeah, maybe that is one of the reasons that we see this trailblazing or this hybridity being done one way but not the other.
Yeah.
The main thing that I took from Nurit is that one of my main qualities, which is living a very structured life in the PhD. Although to some people it might not look that structured, but I promise I am a very structured and planned and organized person.
Oh, you are.
Thanks. That this will actually work out well for industry, because I was surprised, because I figured industry would be slightly more structured than academia, because in academia, like the only structure you have is that you've got a deadline about 4 years away from you. That's not much structure. So I think
no.
everything that's not academia would be an increase from the lack of structure that we have in academia. But I thought industry could be quite messy as well. But it's nice to know it's actually quite a bit more structured. So yeah, it's good to know. So if you're looking for structure, go into industry. Apparently.
Well, yeah, and it was interesting to discuss the sort of transferable skills between both industry and academia, because that's something that we don't really talk about. We sort of say you're more suited for an academic lifestyle, or you're more suited for an industry lifestyle. I guess it sort of seems to be it's either one or the other. But no, it was nice, I guess, to hear that one of the skills that we mentioned in our very first episode that we thought, was really important for a successful PhD experience as resilience is also one of these transferable skills. So, it's good to know that even though the PhD is a training program for a very specific, rigid career path, you also are able to invest and learn skills that are going to be applicable outside of academia. I guess the challenge is trying to figure out, okay, which skills should I invest my time in that are going to be, valuable across multiple domains. I guess that's the challenge. But no, that was really interesting.
Yeah, it was a good talk. It's also, I mean, Nurit is relatively young, which, I mean, it's always nice, and I don't mean to discredit any of our other interviewees, but it's nice to talk to someone who is very successful. First of all, I mean, that's always nice. You can fangirl over them, you can look up to them, and shape and model your life after them. If you really want to go hard. But the main thing is, if we have people that are closer to our own age range, they have gone through career paths which are gonna be more and more similar to ours, because a lot has changed in academia. A lot is changing in industry. Some of these changes are very similar. Some of these changes are contradictory with how these fields interact with each other, and I do hope that just as Nuret has merged both industry and academia, with doing a PhD, with starting her own consultancy, and now leveraging the value of both into each other, that we are able to do something very similar, and maybe even increasingly so, because we're of an even later generation of potential hybrids. I feel like we sound like we're some type of, like cyborg, like we're just the E-class of designed academics.
I mean, that sounds pretty cool to me. I'm not going to argue with that. I'll take that.
Yeah, let's get all sci-fi on it. Secretly, we're not even people. We're not people.
Well, I've realised we've done a lot of fangirling on this episode. I don't know.
For sure. But it was a great conversation.
Yeah, but it was absolutely fantastic. And I think it actually poses a lot of questions and a lot of more interesting topics to sort of come off of this conversation about, how do we further break down these rigid, invisible barriers between academia and industry, and sort of get rid of this, it's either this or it's this, and sort of trying to figure out, what are the other models of a successful career path that you can have, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And how can academia or academics in general be less of a snob about it? I mean, as increasingly more PhDs, so people with very rigid training move into the industry sector, because this is a given with how the jobs are currently divided up in academia, then what academia thinks it has over industry, which is a lot of rigorous scientific training, like that difference is starting to disappear, whether academia likes it or not. And we all know that the main thing that academics argue against industry is that it's not scientifically rigorous enough due to lack of training. or potentially lack of experience. It kind of depends on who you're arguing with. But if that difference falls away, what we have is academia, which is very much often an ivory tower where the publication process or the dissemination of information is very slow, versus industry where this dissemination is much quicker. And that is often blamed on, the research process being much more superficial. But even if you take that factor out of the formula, what you're gonna get is that industry can write up reports and do research much quicker, because they already have the means within the company. If they have people who are scientifically rigorously trained, they have the means, or another set of resources at least. And then once they have results, and they don't have to wait for 3 years to go to the the peer review journal process. So if that is then the case, I think academia needs to kick itself under the ass and get to it.
Yeah, I know academia, it needs to evolve or it's going to die.
Yeah,
right?
Adapt or die.
Yeah, it's I find it so ironic that academia is so inflexible as sort of like an institution, and these sort of traditional hierarchical structures of, I guess it's a byproduct of how competitive academia is, because there really isn't enough jobs for how many people have PhDs or the training that you need, that sort of as a signal of your expertise and your value, you need publications. And really what it comes down to is if you don't have publications, then you're not even going to get a look in.
You're on that pile, but you're never going to be taken off the pile. Like, if you don't meet a certain set of criteria, you're immediately discarded. And it's just, okay, well, I'm sorry that I haven't published in Nature yet, in my third year of the fucking PhD.
Yeah, no, it's true. And everyone has to play the game, because you come into the system as it already is, and it's already so rigid. That's just how it is. But for a discipline, or for academia that prides itself in being so flexible and offering such academic freedom, it's a really rigid institution. And I think, as you say, there's going to be a reckoning coming. We'll see how it's going to play out, whether it'll play out in the next 10 years or it's going to be something a little bit further into the future. But I think it's definitely coming.
I love it. Academia, we're coming for you.
Yeah, I think the Jaws soundtrack should be making its way into your mind right now. Oh my god.
Okay, I think after this level of shenanigans, it's time to call quits. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for Nurit for joining this podcast and having this sit down, this chat with us. We absolutely enjoyed it, if you couldn't tell by now. And that is it for today. See you next week.
Yes. Bye guys.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying.